Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Kindred UMC live show, coming to you pre-recordedly from my front room, aka Kindred Studio A. My name is Chris Hayden. I'm the pastor of Kindred UMC.
Hi, I'm Courtney Young. I'm the Director of Community Engagement at Kindred UMC.
And I'm Preston. Scaramouche, Scaramouche, will you do the fandango? Back to you, Chris.
That's a song, right?
Oh, God.
I know I've heard that somewhere.
It's the song.
That might have been your worst one.
The song.
That might have been your worst one.
Oh, it's da Bohemian Rhapsody.
Okay.
I figured it out.
You got there.
Good job.
That's a good job. Okay. So we are continuing along right where we left off, and we have a lot of stuff, so I want to get into it because I don't want to go on too long. So if you'll remember, there's a couple of recaps that are really important. One is that last week, if you haven't watched last week, go check out last week's live show because we're basically picking up right where that left off and what happens before you need to know. And it's basically this. King David, when he's supposed to be leading his armies in battle, stays home, lets his generals handle that, has sex with one of his soldiers' wives, like with the wife of one of his soldiers. Then when he finds out that she's pregnant, he essentially has his soldier killed so that he can marry this woman and it can all be like hush, hush, shush, shush. Nobody knows it's his baby, you know? Or like they know it's his baby, but they're married now, so it's okay. So he gets away with this murder, basically. And the other thing that contextually is important is just remember how much of a dick King Saul was. Remember that King Saul, when he was the previous king, that he took for himself, did what he wanted, and was selfish and not interested in being faithful and following Yahweh, but instead was used power and privilege and influence for his own benefit and not for the people. So we're going to pick up right where we left off. This is 2 Samuel chapter 12. We're going to read verses 1 through, I think it's 15. Yeah, 15. They sound like this. So there's a little bit of a weird divide here. So I'm actually going to read the last part of the previous chapter and include it in the story because it needs to happen. So all this stuff happened with David and Bathsheba, and Uriah gets killed, and now he's married Bathsheba. But the thing that David had done displeased Yahweh. That's where it really should have been divided, but because the numbers weren't in the scrolls, anyway. And Yahweh sent Nathan to David. Nathan is the new prophet. So it's a big book, so we had to skip over some stuff. One of the things we skipped over was Samuel, the prophet that originally started, and whom the book is named after. After whom the book is named, I should say.
Yep.
He dies, and Nathan is now the new prophet, and he's the one who actually oversees the coronation of David. So Nathan, who is the new prophet, gets sent to David by Yahweh. He came to him and said to him, "There were two men in a certain city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. He brought it up, and it grew up with him and with his children. It used to eat of his meager fare and drink from his cup and lie in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and he was loath to take one of his own flock or herd to prepare for the wayfarer who had come to him." Hospitality is a big thing. If a traveler comes and you have wealth, you are expected to prepare a feast and house them. But he didn't want to take one of his own flock. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared that for the guest who had come to him. Then David's anger... So just let's check in because the story can get a little weird when we use scriptural language because it's a little Shakespearean. So Nathan comes to David and says, "Let me tell you a story." Or let me tell you about, not a story, but let me tell you about this guy. There was a rich man and a poor man. Rich man has lots of flocks, and the poor man has only one lamb that he loves like a pet, and more than that, it says, like a daughter. It eats from his meager fare and drinks from his cup and lies in his bosom, is the language used here. And when a traveler comes to the rich man's house, the rich man doesn't want to take any of his flock, and so he takes the poor man's lamb instead, slaughters it, and prepares it to feed the traveler.
I'm going to fight the rich man.
So, then David's anger was greatly kindled against the man. He said to Nathan, "As Yahweh lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. He shall restore the lamb fourfold because he did this thing, and because he had no pity." So, David feels like you do. Like, fuck this guy. This guy's a real piece of shit.
What the hell?
Yeah. Nathan said to David, "You are the man.
Cool.
Thus says Yahweh, the God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel, and I rescued you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your bosom, and gave you the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that had been too little, I would have added as much more. Why have you despised the word of Yahweh to do what is evil in his sight? You have struck down Uriah," that's the husband of Bathsheba. "You have struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and have taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house. For you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says Yahweh, I will rise up trouble against you from within your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes, and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of the very sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel and before the sun."
Yikes.
So it's pretty serious shit. He's like, "Hey, I gave you everything, and how dare you? And now I'm going to take everything away from you." And I'm sorry, ladies, it's definitely a patriarchal society and context. Women in this era are viewed kind of as property of the man who's married them. It's not fair, it's not right, but in order to understand the story and get at what the scripture means, we kind of have to accept that that's the context they were living in. So Nathan now just rebukes David, just boom, this is what God says about what you did. Now, it begs the question, how is David going to respond? Because if you'll remember, Saul was a real dickhead. Saul was someone who was like, screw it, I'll do it. It's the Bill O'Reilly, the old Bill O'Reilly. We'll do it live! We'll do it live! That's how Saul was. And so now Nathan has come into the court of the king and just absolutely rebuked him in no uncertain terms. And now the question is, and remember, one of the stories was Saul being jealous of David and trying to kill him in the court of the king, which was completely legal because he's the king. And so now the question is, what is David going to do to Nathan? And this is David's response. David said to Nathan, I have sinned against Yahweh. Nathan said to David, now Yahweh has put away your sin, you shall not die. Nevertheless, because by this deed you have utterly scorned Yahweh, the child that is born to you shall die. And then Nathan went to his house. So, the response of David is a contrast to the response of Saul. Saul is utterly self-involved and self-indulgent, and the question comes when Nathan the prophet confronts David on his shit very publicly. Because remember, David got away with this. Mm-hmm. And Nathan hears a word from God that says, this is what you need to go say to David. And then he just spells it all out. Now, it's kind of genius because you can't just walk into the court and be like, I know what you did. Hang him. Cut his head off. Instead, Nathan very cleverly tells this story about the rich man and the poor man, and the rich man taking from the poor man, and how unfair this is. And you can hear the parallels. David has multiple wives and all the wealth of Israel. And yet, he took the one thing that was beloved by someone else that was not supposed to be his. Again, this is patriarchal, problematic language for sure, but in order to get to the story, we have to understand that Bathsheba, in these eyes, is considered to be a little bit like property. and he kills Uriah to take Bathsheba. And so like now then Nathan rebukes him, says all this stuff, like Yahweh is against you now. And then David's response, which is so critical, is not, how dare you speak to me? You can't come in here and say that to me. I didn't do it. But instead it is confession. It is, you are correct. I have sinned against Yahweh. And there's a sense of like, do what you will with me. And then as a result, Yahweh relents and allows David to remain king and allows David to keep his house. But the child that's about to be born of adultery, he says that child's not going to survive, which is a whole nother, we can get into that too. Cause there's property problems there too. Like children are property too, until they become, full grown men. But there's something about the, like, you're not going to benefit from this, but because you've confessed, you get to stay in relationship with Yahweh. So I want to talk about confrontation, defensiveness, and how do we actually, like, because this is a pretty remarkable response from a person in power, especially when I think about today. So let me pause there and just ask, first of all, is there anything that comes to mind around that story in that text? And then I can ask more specific questions too.
Be more specific.
Okay. What memories come up for you when you think about people being defensive, or people? The phrase I like to use is showing their ass a little bit and getting caught. What does that make you think of?
I'd say children, but that's more of like a naive innocence.
Yeah.
Play.
What about, like, let me push you into adults. Like, can you think, because it seems to me like I have seen lots and lots of people who cannot receive feedback well.
Oh, how about employee to a boss conversation? So I won't be specific. Some guy that I know that works at the same place that I work will approach a supervisor and say, you are now contradicting your process here. And so we all need to be on the same page. Please say that process A was what you had stated before. Instead, you're saying process B is correct.
Yeah.
And so they will say, no, it's now process C. So watching the ass be, this is grotesque language, but watching the ass be bare and then covered by more of something, like covering your butt again, just to like show I'm in charge here and I don't want anyone under me thinking I'm wrong or I've overstepped or something like that. Yeah. So, and us not being able to call it out because it feels, I don't know.
So what do you think is, what drives that? Why is it so hard for people to hear? It's one thing if you're being attacked. Like, it's one thing if somebody's trying to publicly shame you, because we definitely have a problem with that. Like the call out culture. I get points but I'm talking about like when somebody pulls a supervisor aside and says something along the lines of, hey, this, I don't understand what you want me to do here. Help me understand. Like, this is, handles it well, and that person still gets defense. Like, what's going on there?
You got something?
I do, but okay, so like, I think just from my own experience that, for me, like, I have a hard time with confrontation. I would say that I handle confrontation very well in the moment, but it's not easy for me to receive it because I then feel bad about myself and think less of myself. I'm already pretty self-deprecating. So like confrontation on top of that, where like, hey, maybe like do this better this time, always makes me feel like I'm not doing enough, I'm not being enough, I'm not whatever enough. Or I'm doing too much, I'm being too much. You have the opposite end of the spectrum as well.
And you've talked about the you're too much.
Yeah, that's like
before.
That's definitely a thing that comes up for me a lot. And so when those conversations happen, my mechanism isn't necessarily to get defensive, immediately so much as just to like withdraw. And I think that's because I feel insecure and vulnerable in those conversations. And so I would imagine there would be a similar response to somebody whose natural approach is to get very defensive.
Yeah, I have memories. This is a little area. This is weird for me because I think I actually receive feedback very, very well. I think I happen to be good at it. I do have memories like of young adulthood where that went terribly wrong, where like I received feedback, but even then I look back on it and I'm like, yeah, that feedback wasn't given very well at all. It was meant to be like traumatic and impactful.
Right.
And I was like, hey man, next time just pull me aside and be like, hey, you're talking a little too much in the business meeting.
Right.
Like let some other people share ideas. Like just count to 5 before you talk. That's all. That's all I need you to do. And if somebody had done that, I would be like, oh, sure, yes, boss. You know, but I actually kind of struggle with the like I don't understand. I can be pretty straightforward and sometimes to a fault because I don't understand. I was like, nobody's saying anything about you. Like. If you told me this, I would go like, okay, fair enough. We can talk. So I really, it's not just like, asking for a friend. Like I'm really genuinely like, I don't understand the defensiveness that almost everyone seems to have in any type of feedback. And it feels like, so, okay, go with me here. I think it's attached to, so people, because we're social, we seek prestige in any, like praise and prestige in whatever form that works for us. And what I'm seeing a lot in what I was talking about with call-out culture, so the idea of pulling someone aside privately and being like, hey, when you said that, I want you to know that actually I went through something like that and it was a little insensitive what you said. Instead, what we do is we publicize it. I caught this person doing this, and like never giving that person the ability to either apologize or learn something, so I get that defensive-ness. That makes sense to me. What I don't get is the experiences where I've had, I literally will be like, hey man, I don't think this is working the way you want it to work right now, and I want to help in any way I can, but I can't support this part of it. Like things like that, and it goes bad. It goes bad almost all the time.
Well, I think there's something big about the sunk cost fallacy, which we've brought up a few times, which is you put so much effort into something that you would rather it kind of fail. Okay, how do I say this? You want to see it through, even if it fails, versus kind of cut your losses and ditching the project to start something new that is going to work.
So what do you think emotionally is wrapped up in that? Because I think you're right about there's a lot of stuff.
I 100% believe it's pride,
embarrassment,
and embarrassment's tied to like your pride, you being again insecure, inefficient, not helping the cause, not being a part of the team, not this. So, and then in a competitive workmanship way, you're now lesser than others. Others will now get more opportunities to do other things than you will because you'll be thought of as less than, or you think you will be thought of as less than.
Well, I mean, I think everything always comes down to there is something inside of us that, in different versions, but like something inside of us that's like, will you love me now, mommy? Like there's always something that kind of does that. And I think there's a lot of that. So, like this is how I cope with that. I prove that I'm the boss and that's how, and you can't say that. Like I think some of that is going on too. So as we are approaching our kind of final thoughts, like what is it about David that allows this really, I think, unique and rare response to being absolutely called out in front of his court? Like what, and not even necessarily David, like if you've ever seen things like what is going on, what is different about that? And like, because I think that's one of the big takeaways from this text. Like the power of confession, the power of humility, the power to receive new information. Like the post that you did recently.
It's okay to change your mind.
Change your mind. Like, for fuck's sake, it's okay to change your mind, you know? You could learn something in a heartbeat that changes everything, you know?
I think it comes down to like knowing what you're about and believing that you're worthy of good things, and not placing your own worth or worthiness in what you're doing or what your opinions are. And so I think like truly understanding and being okay with who you are will in turn, like it's not 100% this is how it's going to be, but in my own experience, like when I believe that I'm enough, or when I believed I'm not too much, or when I have put my worth in myself rather than in the things that I'm trying to do and change, I'm way more okay changing my mind and receiving that feedback.
Yeah, but that's selfish, and I hate myself for it. So my ideals are really better than I am. So that makes me a better person.
Well, that's how it can go wrong.
That's idealism. People...
I would say, so I think there's something going on with David about...
I think it's the king thing, too. Like, call the king out in front of everyone who thinks he's an angel. Where Nathan and, by vector, Yahweh is like, hey.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone needs to see this, too. I'll treat you like, fair at first and then call you out.
I think there's something about... I think David is able to respond this way because he's not rooting himself in accomplishments and what it's because of he's really rooting himself in what God says about him.
Right.
And so like when God says what you did was a breach in the worst possible way.
And you know it.
Yeah. And David can go David isn't worried about oh no, do I get caught? What am I? Instead, David is more concerned about who am I in the eyes of God? Who am I called to be? It's more being rather than doing. Like, I think David is rooted in being as opposed to doing. Like, his self-worth is rooted in who he actually is and who God has made him to be, which is, by the way, a hard thing to get to. And it is the root of all the work that we do in discipleship groups. It's about getting people to a place of being where their identity can be rooted in a being rather than a doing. And sometimes the doing is not just what you do to accomplish and prove, but also what has been done to you to demonstrate that you're not worthy. Like, because there's also there's an essence of that too. And I think David in this particular text is really demonstrating he's placing his identity into the hands of a God who has already said, I see the heart, you are my chosen anointed. And then you can put that language on just about anything. Like, this is how I made you, this is who I want you to be, this is how I love you. And what you do is less important than who you are. So, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
Figure it out why I'm so caught up. Got me feeling